So as an intuitive, one question that I get asked a lot is how you know when it's your intuition talking to you, or if you're communicating with spirit, for example, how you know it's not your voice talking to you. And I get a lot of examples of people who, for example, very clearly heard a voice in their head tell them something, especially for women, it might be, you're pregnant. And then clearly they later are not pregnant. Or someone who hears this voice very clearly in their mind say, you've got cancer, when in reality they don't at all. And so obviously this causes a lot of discomfort in people, especially if you want to believe that you have this connection to source, which of course we all do have that connection to source. But then we get angry and say, well, why would this connection be lying to me if this is a spirit guide who's supposedly out there for my best good? Why is it lying to me? Or am I just making this all up? What the hell? Am I going crazy? I do have to admit, I've been through this. In those times when I was healing during my year of shadow and light, there were times I heard messages that later did not prove to be correct. I thought, however, in the moment that they were. It is challenging. I admit it. And there are still times. There was a time about a year ago when I got a message that very specifically was scary to me, and I worried about it for a long time, and it ended up not coming to pass. But I was certain it was from my guides. It turned out that after thinking about it and considering it for several weeks, maybe even months, honestly, when I managed to take away my fear of it and look at the message clearly, I realized later that it was not actually a message from my guides. Whether it was a message from another source that was trying to scare me, that is a possibility if I didn't have my shields up correctly, or something else, I'm still not sure there. But I do realize, because I have so much experience now in hearing and listening to my guides, I realized when I was able to step back from it and look at it objectively that I had been incorrect. So what that really boils down to is experience. You just have to get a lot of experience. That's how you really start to recognize if a message is from your intuition or from a friendly guide or spirit that you have asked for insight, or if you're just making it up, or if it's from an unfriendly source. Just for simplicity's sake, we're going to talk about just your intuition. So we are going to talk about specifically just messages that come from your intuition. Everyone is intuitive. Everyone is a little bit psychic. Everybody. Some people more than others because they train it, they learn to listen to it. I grew up with this ability, just knowing things, and I never even questioned it because it was just second nature to me. And then I got out of it when I went to college, go through high school, you're trained to think in a certain way, and everything has to be evidence-based. So I started thinking, okay, well, maybe I'm a little crazy, or maybe this isn't right, or that intuition isn't really... that's not really my intuition. That's just me making shit up that I want to be real, right? Our society kind of takes that wonder out of it and says, well, if you don't have proof, this can't be a real thing. So the goal then, I always think a healthy dose of skepticism is a good thing. Always. Relationships are built on trust, and relationship with your guides is absolutely no different. Or a relationship with your intuition. It is absolutely no different. You have to have experience. You have to build up experience so that both parties in a relationship, for example, know that they can trust each other and learn how each other work. I mean, you typically don't become instant friends with someone. And even if you do, it still takes you some time to really understand each other and for each to learn how the other communicates and to really get on the same wavelength. Really, that is how trusting your intuition works. And that's what I learned in my year of shadow and light and after. Again, going back to that proof. So the best way to learn to distinguish whether it's your voice of intuition or wishful thinking or the darkest part of your brain just telling you something really is practice. Lots and lots of practice. I'm actually working on creating a program to help people distinguish better and get this practice and learn how to better recognize and trust these messages from their intuition. But in the meantime, I created basically a list of 5 top points. Point number 1, write it down or record it in some way. When you have an interaction that you believe is your intuition or a message from spirit, but I'm just going to use the word intuition, record that message as well as any other sensory or emotional input that came along. If you felt a particular sensation in your stomach or your chest or even your foot, whatever it may be, or if you hear wind chimes at the time, no matter what it is, how odd it is, write it down, record it in some way, note it for later, because doing so allows you to come back to it later to see if the message turned out to be right or wrong, and you can start noticing the commonalities between all the wrong messages and the commonalities between all the right messages, and you can see what's different between the right messages and the wrong messages. What you will learn is that your intuition or your guides will communicate with you in a certain way. A wrong message and a right message may, if you hear a voice, may sound exactly the same in your inner ear. But the message from your intuition may come along with a particular tingle in, a tingle in your left thumb, maybe, whatever it is for you. But you won't know that unless you write it down. You may think you'll remember it, but trust me, you won't. You'll come back to this later and be like, oh, right, I forgot about that. This particular signal is kind of what I call it, a signal of trust. Or I guess you can even think of it as like the bell for Pavlov's dogs, right? So it's training you to trust this message. And it may change. It will change, actually, the more you practice. That message will, or that little trust signal will eventually change with time. It will be there and it will be consistent. Number 2, be sure to regularly practice meditation or some other mindfulness technique. Now, this is really important. This is in addition to asking for and listening to advice. But if the negative thoughts are from you, meditation or mindfulness will help you slow down and possibly even stop those messages. People who regularly practice some sort of prayer, meditation, mindfulness often report increased intuition, or at least increased awareness of their intuition. Being mindful of your own thoughts and your reactions to stimuli and to those thoughts can make it a bit easier for you to begin to notice if those messages you're getting are just your worried thoughts, if they are typical for you in response to a certain situation. Too often we are reacting to our thoughts and just reacting in the moment. Actually, a lot of times we're reacting in the moment and we never actually pay attention to our thoughts, but our thoughts just bounce around inside our heads. Meditating or practicing some other mindfulness technique actually helps us to get a handle on that. We can see how busy our minds are. We can hear the thoughts that repeat over and over because we're actually giving attention to those thoughts. We're not necessarily engaging with those thoughts, but we're giving attention to those thoughts and seeing those messages that play over and over and over in our minds. And if you are consistently doing this kind of meditation practice, when you're in a good mood or a bad mood, if you're doing it consistently, you'll start to see the difference between good moods and bad moods as well. And you'll see the difference in those thoughts. The third thing that helps us know and learn if those messages are from our intuition or otherwise is to get outside opinions and feedback. Sometimes we are just too close to an issue to see it clearly. And of course, if we are so worried about an issue that we can't think clearly, that we are just bound up tight in knots and in dread, you're probably not actually going to be able to hear your intuition. You're going to get those dread messages, those fear messages. We all know how sometimes when we're in that mode, it's hard for us. Like, we'll go complain to a friend and we say we want advice from a friend or a loved one, but then we don't really hear what they're telling us. We don't hear their advice. Or we say, yes, but. We've all been guilty of it, and we all know people who are guilty of it. What you can do when you are bound up like that in those knots of doubt and indecision and fear is go to a trusted source. Go to a friend or use an oracle or use a psychic or intuitive. When I was in my year of shadow and light and I was panicked, sometimes I would just grab an oracle and flip a card. And then I would look at the message that card or rune had for me and meditate on that. You want to be careful not to get into, what? I don't understand, or I don't like that answer, and keep turning over card and turning over card and turning over card. The point here is that you're not looking for a full, complete answer, and you're not looking for an answer you want. You're just saying, look, I need some insight on this situation. Please tell me what I need to know. 1 or 2 cards, most. That's it, okay? It's the same if you're going to a psychic or an intuitive, or even just going to a friend. And again, the point here is just to recognize that there are some things we are just too close to see or hear for ourselves. And the same here as with anything else. Write it down afterward. Write down the key points, whether it's a conversation with a friend or whatever. Write it down. And a lot of times when you come back to it later, you will see that you were getting the same message in multiple forms, especially if you went to multiple sources, you were getting the same message or different pieces of the message, but it was all the same message. Point 4, this kind of relates to point 2. Do something that relaxes you. Clarity often comes in when you are relaxed and you are no longer worrying about the situation or thinking about the situation. This might be a really long bath or shower. That's what works for me. Some people find it while exercising, some while meditating, some while doing yoga, some while reading. Who knows what it is for you? You will know what it is for you. But it has to be something that usually takes your mind off your troubles. And then when you're not focusing on the problem, clarity arises. And again, write it down. And finally, point 5, write down your worries about a situation and then give them up. I know this is a lot easier than it seems, but again, sometimes our thoughts spin inside our heads over and over and over again. They just spin and spin and spin, and we get stuck in that cycle, in that loop, and we can't get clarity even if we try. If our guides, or intuition in this case, if your intuition is trying to speak to you, but your head is full of worry, your stomach is tied up in knots, the message is not going to come through, or it's not going to come through clearly. And you can think of this like a friend yelling at you from across the room at a very noisy party where the music is cranked up all the way. You just can't hear it. You want to, and you see the mouth moving. That's kind of the way with your intuition. You might get this little hit, but you're like, what? I don't quite understand. And it's the same thing. So if you just write down everything that's just racing in your head, sometimes that is enough to get it all out. For whatever reason, writing it down just gets it out of your head, at least for a little while. But write it down and then burn it or bury it or walk away from it in some way. That's like turning down the volume on that stereo at the party. Sometimes when I do this, I actually get into a meditative state. I'm not even thinking about all of those worries that are in my brain. I'm writing them down and I'm like, okay, fine. Brain in hand, you do your thing. And I just let my hand, just get out all that crap. And then again, I stop worrying about it. But then a lot of times that leads into, if I get into the zone, I can start to hear and feel my guide's presence. And then we can actually start to have a conversation. Sometimes it works that quickly. And of course, it's not always quickly. Sometimes it's an hour or 2 writing session. And so if you have children or are otherwise leading a very busy life, you may actually have to take some time for yourself for this. But this can lead directly to hearing or feeling your intuition. So then, if you're already writing things down, it's a perfect transition. Start having a conversation. Write your question on the paper and record the answer. So again, we go all the way back to point 1. Write it down, record it in some way. Those are the 5 main points. The key here is not to act immediately on any advice you get. Most things in life are not life or death. In the moment, you have time to consider. You have time to ask for further insight, to think about the guidance you receive, and again, to go back. Because sometimes you're dwelling on an issue for weeks at a time. And if you are writing these things down, these hits, as you get them, you may go back to them in a week after you've finally stopped worrying about it, and you'll see there was that one message coming through in all these channels. The message was slightly different each time, but it was all essentially the same message. Really, this is the best thing to do. Again, practice, practice, practice. That's how you get to know when the message you are receiving is from your intuition or from you. This teaches you eventually how to recognize those signals, because your intuition will always come through with certain signals for you. Thank you for listening, and please be sure to look up my story, My Year of Shadow and Light, either on my website or on YouTube. The links will be below in the description for this audio. You can visit my blog by going to my website, srsstringham.com, to see the services I offer, including readings and distance and in-person Reiki services.